But looking forward, I mean, you've seen criticism even from the opposition party. They say it's political, but looking beyond that, they say it is hypocritical. Some people have said, oh, if you've seen the famous letter going around now, that if he were alive, he most probably would not have taken the award that has been conferred on him, was a human rights activist. You have been a human rights activist as well. They say that for you to honor the memories of people like that, you really have to preach or practice what you preach. Do you really think that the government has to do that for it to be able to do things like this?
I think that people are beginning to draw similarities with events that are happening today and looking back to 1984 and perhaps even looking back to the dark days of military rule that President Babangida continued until 1998 when General Abacha, who had succeeded him, died. I think that there is an increasing concern about the atmosphere of fear that is creeping into the polity. There is an increasing fear about the presence and overwhelming activities of security agencies and services that is creating fear among citizens that shouldn't prevail or shouldn't happen in a democracy.
Do you think those fears are founded, or are they just things that people are creating out of the blues? You are an activist as we speak. Do you feel that fear?
I think the proportions may be different. I was sitting at a diplomat's house in 1994 waiting, and there were a couple of us activists who were sitting. We were supposed to have lunch. And in that lunch was to be Kudirat Abiola, and this was a Canadian diplomat's house, and we were waiting. And when we didn't see her, we started eating. In the middle of eating, we got news that she had been shot on her way to the lunch that I was in. I had never in my life felt so very bad. We are not there yet, but you begin to wonder, given some of the things you are seeing, some of the activities of security services, whether we should not be concerned. And we would raise, and we should raise concern, that where citizens are beginning to get frightened in a democracy, then we have a challenging situation here. And I think that when people say that President Buhari needs to begin to practice and create an environment of democracy, an environment of freedom, it is genuinely said. Elections are coming, yes, but they mustn't be won on the altar of the sacrifice of the freedom of Nigerians, and that's the concern that we all have.
Well, a lot of things have happened since democracy, beg your pardon now, Inauguration Day, perhaps I should say. It was still Democracy Day on May 29th this year when the president signed that Not Too Young to Run bill, shortly after. He promised to sign it on that day. Now, I know that shortly after, I mean, for some Nigerians, they felt there was nothing to celebrate. They just felt, well, yes, it's now a ritual. We listened to the president's speech, and then, 19 years after, they're wondering what has this really brought to us. Now, I don't know what the mood is. Some people will say it's changed a little in the last 2 weeks. In the last 2 weeks, considering all that has been happening, even with this new declaration, we've seen, some people's spirits a bit lifted. But then there's people who are saying democracy. What is the essence of democracy? They're wondering, is it good governance? Some people say no, that's not the end. I had two guests here last week who say that good infrastructure and all those kinds of things are not, they're desirable, but they're not the outcomes that you're looking for in a democracy. Are we getting wrong what we should be looking for out of the democracy we have decided to practice?
I think democracy requires a lot of transparency and accountability, government being accountable to citizens. Are we getting accountability from government? I think people will really question whether there's a lot of accountability going on, and especially when you watch the squabble between the legislature and the executive, and as well the intimidation and fear that we saw happen with the judiciary. One of the most despairing moments for me as a lawyer was to wake up in the morning and see the news of security services going to the houses of Supreme Court justices, breaking their doors, breaking their walls, and arresting justices of the Supreme Court in manners that are completely in violation of due process. One of the things that really worries me is to see the squabble as well going on between the executive and the legislature. Yes, there should be tension between especially these two arms of government, because for the legislature, they have a responsibility of lawmaking, representation, and oversight, and especially the issues of oversight would mean that they are asking questions of the executive that may make the executive uncomfortable. Now, we're not getting the executive respond the way the Constitution anticipates that they should. And of course, we're not getting the legislature itself operate to the optimal in terms of being very professional in the way that the oversight is carried out. But when you have a system where the executive does not feel that it should be oversighted in a way that it should be or is anticipated in the Constitution by the legislature, then you worry about whether you really are practicing democracy. When you have citizens living in fear that they may be arrested by the police for reasons they may not understand, maybe have blogged something, put out something on Twitter that may just really have offended a public official or a government official, and they live in fear of being arrested for that, I think that these are not what democracy entails.
Have we been able to sit to actually decide what the outcomes of the democracy we want to practice should be?
The outcome means that people should feel free, people should be able to bring out their best enterprise, be able to bring out their best creativity. Government should be able to create the environment, the infrastructure for this to happen. This is not what is going on.
You have been an advocate for human rights. Would you say that it's improving, or would you say that, well, it's just not being less reported?
I think that the situation may be deteriorating. There are serious human rights situations and reports going on of violations in this country. And we must go back. If you look at the reports being issued by Amnesty International, which the government hasn't responded to, but instead you have seen Amnesty being almost frustrated by government action in terms of what it is doing. There are reports of more than 300 people, Shiites, killed in Kaduna. There are reports of people being kept in prison without being tried, even when courts have made pronouncements. There were reports of Supreme Court judges, justices and judges of courts, their houses being, their walls being broken into in the middle of the night. Nothing justifies that kind of action, especially when you want to convince the international community and Nigerians that we are practicing a democracy, and you ridicule your judiciary the way that we have done. All of this create an atmosphere of tension, of fear that cannot lead us to development.
Well, some people will argue that the judges are, members of the judiciary. Couldn't they sue? They know their rights, don't they?
Well, they could sue, but given what has happened, given the way that some of these intimidations took place, given the way that some of them were tried in the media, accused without due process, and yet we know what is going on with the NJC at this time, that it is also very concerned about some of the allegations being made and is proactively dealing with some of these issues that they were accused of.
I'm going to ask you to please hold your thoughts for us. We'll take a break. The conversation will focus a bit more on our elections, which Mr. Nwankwo has monitored closely through the Transition Monitoring Group since our return to democracy. In a moment, please stay with us.